Welcome to ACC Nation, featuring sports news and special guest interviews. Here's Will Ojanen and Jim Quist.
This is ACC Nation's Pitt football preview with the editor, featured writer, and podcast host with Rivals Panther Lair. He covers football, basketball, and all Pitt sports news. He's here to share his thoughts on the 2024 version of Panthers football. Our special guest, Chris Peak. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk to other ACC cover. This conference takes a lot of flack. So it's nice to talk to people who will carry the flag. Carry the flag while also recognizing the conference's shortcomings. I feel
That's
like
right.
I remember when Pitt was in the Big East. Man, it was hard. It was hard for a few years there to cover a Big East team, but we soldiered on, and here we are with the ACC. So it's fun.
That's right. It's family. It's we can talk bad about each other, but
yeah,
don't let Paul Feinbaum say anything bad about us, because then it's all over with. So anyway, hey, before we get into football, I got a quick question for you. Probably is not going to have a short answer, but that's why I'm asking it. Your AD, is she headed to Northwestern? And if she does, how might that impact Pat Narduzzi?
Yeah. So the first part, I don't know. She's involved. She's involved in that search, interviewing in that search, potentially a finalist in that search. Depending on when you release this, maybe the answer will already be known. But as of the time when we're talking here, that's the spot we're in this thing, is that she's involved, interviewing, potentially a finalist. We'll see what happens with the Northwestern search. If she were to go, it's just not a good time to have instability in college sports. You need stability in your leadership. Now, there's always a question of, well, how stable is your leadership? Is it, the leadership you have? But it's, in general, it's just not a good time to be changing things. Pat Narduzzi's under contract for a few more years. I think given Pitt and finances, they're not really in a position to buy out 4 years of a contract or 5 years of a contract. And so I think somebody like Pat Narduzzi or Jeff Capel, they're going to be safe. But if there's a change, it's like I say, I don't like instability. Pitt changed chancellors last year. They brought in a new chancellor. I understand Patrick Gallagher, the former chancellor, it was time for him to retire. He was ready to hang up the Spurs, so to speak. It's just not a good, you need as much stability and solid, strong leadership as you can get right now, particularly if you're a program in the ACC, but if you're a program anywhere, you have to have leadership that's willing to embrace the current state of things in college sports. And maybe Pitt could find someone who could do that better than Heather Lyke, the AD, did. But if it was up to me, like I say, I kind of like stability. So I don't know. The next couple of days could be really interesting around here.
Just from an outsider's perspective, and this is just me talking, I've always been very impressed with what Heather has been doing there at Pitt. Now, I'm not up close and personal, so I don't see it like you do. Okay. But it always appears as if she's made some very strategic moves, some good moves. I think that has helped stabilize Pitt athletics overall. Am I way off base on that, or is that accurate?
No. I think there are some definite positive bullet points on her resume. Obviously, she didn't hire Pat Narduzzi, but she's kept him around and extended him maybe when it was appropriate. She hired Jeff Capel, which for 4 years didn't look like a great move. And then the last two, it has looked like a great move. Yeah. And I think even some of the hires that maybe haven't worked out as well, there's been a good thought process behind it. So baseball, she hired Mike Bell, who was a top assistant at Florida State for a long time. Mm-hmm. Baseball hasn't taken off here at Pitt in the 8 years or however many years that Mike Bell has been here, but it's baseball at Pitt. This is a very tough conference for baseball. It's going to be an uphill battle. But it was a good thought process. She hired Lance White as a women's basketball head coach. He was a top assistant at Florida State. Again, a good process. It didn't work out. She ended up having to fire Lance White, but a good process. She's made a lot of upgrades facility-wise, particularly to the Olympic sports, which had fallen into pretty bad disrepair over the past 2 decades, maybe more since they really did it, maybe 3 decades since they did anything with that side of things. And so in a lot of respects, I think there's some strong positive bullet points. And then, like anybody, there's ups and downs, and there's some spots where you say, well, you probably could have handled this situation better or done better with this. The biggest thing is, who's going to shepherd you into this next era? Who's going to help you make the most of what the landscape is becoming? Who's going to help you manage revenue sharing? Because all these schools now, it's like, hey, I know you were all running exactly a zero margin here. Somehow all of your budgets worked out perfectly to net zero, so you're not in the red, but now you got to come up with an extra 22 million. So who's going to manage that? And I think if it's Heather Lyke, I'm really interested to see how she approaches that challenge. And if it's someone else, I'm, ditto, because that's what everybody's facing.
Appreciate that perspective. That's like I said, that's an up close and personal view, and really knowing what's going on closer to home, which is important. Without people such as yourself covering specific teams and schools, we would never know any of this stuff that is shared then with the rest of the ACC and in sports in general. So appreciate that. Let's take a look at football. Will?
All right. We're excited to talk to you, Chris. I know we've been following each other on Twitter for a long time, and I've always, you've been one of my favorite guys when it comes to Pitt. So I'm looking forward to this. So I'm going to start here. I think one of the more interesting things for me is the hiring of Kay Bell as offensive coordinator, one of the most high octane offenses in the FCS of Western Carolina. And then you got Pat Narduzzi, who's very old school in his ways. So I'm just kind of curious how this new school, old school thing is going to work out.
Well, first of all, I have to say we're all very careful around here not to say high octane, because 13 years ago they hired Todd Graham and he came in boasting of his high octane offense, and 11 months later, after a 6-6 regular season, he was gone. So he talked a lot about high octane. It's sort of a dirty word around here, so we don't call it that. We have to work our way around it because it's so natural. I mean, that's what you call a tempo offense that attacks and it's aggressive. You call it a high octane offense. So we've had to sort of that's not in the lexicon around here, I guess I would say. But no, it's really remarkable. I mean, this is a complete 180 from who Pat Narduzzi is, from who he's ever been, from any of the offenses he's ever. I mean, he's always been a defensive coach, but the offenses that his teams have had, either at Pitt or you go back to when he was with Mark D'Antonio at Michigan State or Cincinnati. I mean, they've never done anything like this. And Pitt had some interesting creative offenses with Matt Canada in 2016 when they ran a lot of jet sweeps and things like that. Mark Whipple, when he finally got his offense running here, they would use tempo a little bit. They were obviously aggressive through the air, but it wasn't like this. It wasn't snapping the ball every 12 to 15 seconds. It wasn't go, hurry up. It's the opposite. I mean, it's the opposite of what Pat Narduzzi has always believed. He's a defensive coach who wants to, ball control, time of possession. That's what it is. Well, sometimes when you go 3-9 and you have the worst offense in the conference and you average 20 points per game and one of the worst offenses in Pitt history, it's a bit of an eye opener, and I think Narduzzi in this offseason did some soul searching, and it probably didn't take long, but he was like, look, if we want to win, like we got to score points and we got to find somebody who can do it. And he went out looking for something different. He went out looking, I forget if he said this or if this was just sort of something we've sort of heard, but I think he went looking for the kind of offenses that really gave him trouble. The offenses that were a real headache to plan for. That's what he tried to find. And, you got to have a certain amount of, I think, self-awareness, a certain amount of honesty to approach it like that, to say, look, what I've tried to do on offense for the last 9 years, I've got to do something different. And I think it's a lot of credit to Pat Narduzzi, who a lot of Pitt fans feel, he's stuck in his ways. He's prehistoric. He doesn't want to adapt to modern football. Well, he went out and got, and this is like a common refrain, like Pitt fans will be like, just go out and find like the top coordinator at FCS who runs like an up-tempo offense and scores a lot of points. Well, that's what he did. I mean, they were the number one offense in FCS last year at Western Carolina. Cade Bell's a young guy. Makes me feel old because they're now hiring coaches younger than me. Like when I started on this job, I was like in my late 20s. They were all in their 40s and 50s. I felt, now I'm older than some of the coaches. It's a little weird, but that's okay. But Cade Bell, he's a young guy. He's got a lot of energy. There's a lot of creativity in what he does. And I think the players, it was one thing Pat Narduzzi said. He said he wanted an offense that the players would be excited about. And I think that's what they've gotten. I think the players are excited. Now, the first time they go out there and go 3 and out and it only takes 13 seconds off the clock, we'll see who's excited. It might be a different story. And I keep saying there's going to be an interesting sort of litmus test for Pat Narduzzi maybe not in week 1 against Kent State, but week 2, they go to Cincinnati. Week 3, they have West Virginia at home. One of those games, they're going to like go 3 and out twice in a row, or maybe 3 times in a row, and only take like a minute and a half off the clock. And his defense is going to be right back out there. Like, are you going to stick with it, Pat? Do you have the stomach to like keep doing this and not get on the headphones and say, Cade, you got to slow down. We can't have the defense back out there that quick. You have to slow down. I'm really curious to see how they adjust during the season, but it's a 180 for Narduzzi. And I think it's a credit to him. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's a credit to him looking at the situation saying, we got to do better than this. I have to fix the offense and going in this direction.
Yeah, you got to credit him for that, because a lot of coaches can be stubborn at times. So the fact that he's making this kind of transition at this point, I think it shows something for him. But this is the 3rd straight season that Pitt's opening up the season with a new quarterback. Now, according to the depth chart, it's either going to be Nate Yarnell, who played in 4 games last year, or the Alabama transfer Eli Holstein. And Coach Narduzzi did say that both of them are going to play against Kent State. Do we have any idea how that all is going to play out on Saturday?
No, not the specifics. There's a little bit of historical precedent, and I've been talking about it all August, and on Monday, Narduzzi referenced it, that his first year, 2015, he came in, they inherited Chad Wojcik, had been the starter the season before, and they also brought in a transfer, Nathan Peterman from Tennessee. And the first game they went out there, Wojcik started, played 2 series, Peterman played the next 2 series, and threw an interception on his second series, didn't play again that game. The next week, they go to Akron. They come out. Wojcik plays the first 2, then Peterman 2, then back and forth, with Peterman ending the first half with like a march down the field, 2-minute offense touchdown, and he played the rest of the season. Like, that was it. So if there's a model or any kind of historical precedent, it's 2 series each until somebody takes the job, and that year that I'm referencing, I think they opened against Youngstown State. So I don't think they were going to dig too deep on making decisions there, unless it was plainly obvious, and it wasn't really all that clear. But the next week they go on the road, it's in a rainstorm, and Peterman really took control of the offense. And I think that's what they're looking for. I think they're looking for somebody who's going to take control of the offense. This season they open with Kent State, which is not an FCS program, but I mean, the way they played last year, they're not too far off. I mean, they're not very good. So this should be a game Pitt can win comfortably. Who can operate the offense the best? Who can take the offense down the field, take control, and really kind of move the offense? And I think that's what they'll be looking for. And I think they'll give the 2 guys, Yarnell and Holstein, equal opportunity. And my guess is that they'll have somebody, they'll name a full-time starter for the Cincinnati game in week 2. They actually, my real guess is they won't name somebody. Internally, they'll have an answer, but they won't name it publicly, because God forbid you let the other team know who your quarterback's going to be. They'll try to get at least 1 more week of subterfuge out of it, that they don't allow Cincinnati to know that it's this guy or that guy. But I think internally they'll have that answer between week 1 and week 2, which I'm excited about seeing, because like you said, I mean, like, I can't, that year I referenced was 2015. It was the last time we had anything like this around here. Because after that, Peterman was the guy in 2016. 2017, they brought in Max Brown, and he just had the job. By 2018, Kenny Pickett was the starter for 18, 19, 20, and 21. And then they bring in Keaton Slovis for 22. You knew it was his job. Last year, Phil Dracovic, at least to the start of the season. So now there's actually a quarterback competition. There's a little bit of intrigue, and we're going to get to see it play out on the field, which is extra fun, because usually we just have coaches tell us, oh, well, this happened in practice or that happened. We're going to get to see the competition play out, and it adds a little bit of extra spice to what should probably be an otherwise, pretty drab game.
The depth chart contains the word "or" quite a bit. Running backs, no exception. Rodney Hammond returned. He was the guy who led the team in rushing, but Desmond Reed is somebody who also came over from Western Carolina in the portal, but a guy is 5'8", 175. I can't imagine is going to be the bell cow back in a situation like this. But how are they going to run these 2 guys?
It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, it's funny with Reed. He the first time we talked to him, he came in and stood behind the podium, and it was like up here, like the top of the podium, and it's not a tall podium. I mean, he's a little guy. But apparently the players on the team give him a hard time. He goes up to the podium, and they're like, "Come on, man, stand up. What are you doing?" So he's small, but the thing Pat Narduzzi has said about him is that he's really tough. I agree. A guy that size, I can't see him being the bell cow. But looking at the last 2 years of Western Carolina, he was that. He had 140 touches in like 8 games last year. He had 152 touches in less than a full season the year before. which, I mean, there is part of the story that he didn't play a full season either year. He had injuries that kind of slowed him down, but Cade Bell was willing to give him the ball, 100 plus carries, 20 plus catches. And again, in a shortened season, he was willing to feed him the ball and give him a lot of opportunities. Now, they're going to run a lot of plays. So I think you could see a decent workload, 15, 18 touches per game for one run, like say it's Reed, and then maybe 10 to 15 touches for Hammond. I don't know if that math adds up. That might be too many touches, but I can see a lot of touches for these guys as this, throughout the games, because they're going to use that tempo and run a lot of plays. Desmond Reed has experience in the offense. He knows how it works. I think that has impressed the coaches because he's sort of been able to seamlessly step in. And again, they keep emphasizing his toughness, that even Narduzzi has said that he maybe underestimated him when he first came in because of the size. And then as he's seen him play, he's just said, like, okay, this guy can hang. So I think they'll use both guys a lot. I think both guys will get the ball a lot. They'll be on the field a lot. Who ends up getting more touches will probably come down to who ends up staying healthy, to be honest.
That's a good point. Receivers. So there's going to be some catches to go around with Bub Means gone, but Kanata Mumfield returns along with tight end Gavin Bartholomew, who's been a steady force at tight end for a couple of years now. But who is someone at this receiving corps is probably going to take the next step?
It's really interesting. They have Kenny Johnson, who's a sophomore this year and flashed a little bit as a true freshman last year. I think they're expecting him to take a big step. But along with Reed, Desmond Reed, Pitt also brought in two wide receivers who played in this offense at Western Carolina. One guy, Sincere Lee, who came directly from Western Carolina. Another guy, Raphael Poppy Williams, who was at Western Carolina 2 years ago, went to San Diego State last year, and now he's here at Pitt playing in Cade Bell's offense again. Like Reed, those guys have experience in the offense. They know how it works. They know what to do. And I think that has helped them a lot. Also, like Reed, they're not very big. Poppy Williams is a short guy, but I think he's going to make a lot of plays. This offense is predicated on scheming guys open, getting them into space, getting the ball to them on time, and then letting them make plays. And you go back and look at the stat lines for Desmond Reed, for Poppy Williams, for Sincere Lee. I mean, these guys put up big numbers playing in Cade Bell's offense. So I think Kanate Mumfield's going to be a steady force. I think he's going to probably lead the team in catches. I think Kenny Johnson will put up some good numbers. Gavin Bartholomew, I have been beating the drum for him for years. He was so good as a freshman in 2021 when he was the second tight end. The last 2 years, they've just never really capitalized on his ability. If he catches less than 30 passes this season, it'll be criminal malpractice, coaching malpractice, because the guy's a stud and a really good athlete. But then I think Poppy Williams, like I say, with his experience in the offense, his speed, his quickness, explosiveness, I think he's going to make a lot of plays for them this year.
Of course, the offensive line, it wasn't quite what it's normally been the last few years. I mean, the running game was down quite a bit last year, and some of that was due to some of the offensive line struggles, whether it be injury or just lack of whatever. But I like the tackles, but it's kind of the interior that I'm kind of questioning. What can you tell us about this offensive line?
Yeah, I think you're right. That their biggest thing, like I counted up over the past 3 years. I don't think there's been a year when they've had fewer than 8 linemen play significant chunks of snaps. And sometimes they've had 9 or 10 just because of the injuries. The biggest thing they need this year is just to stay healthy. And part of that is because I'm a little concerned about their depth. As far as the interior of the offensive line, I'm a little bullish. They got at right guard, they got BJ Williams back. He started games as a true freshman last year, which I think is a testament to him. And I think he'll be better this year. At left guard, they've got Ryan Jacoby, who was a transfer from Ohio State 3 years ago. Waited his turn. Last year was supposed to be his big year, and he got hurt in training. He can't miss the entire season, but he's ready to go. I think they're excited about having him. And then at center, they've got Lyndon Cooper, who transferred from NC State this offseason. Started 5 games at NC State, a few of them at center, a few of them at guard. But he ended up winning the job from Terrence Moore, who started the last 9 games for Pitt last season at center. So I think there's something to be encouraged about there. There's just not a lot of depth. I mean, Terrence Moore, like I mentioned, will be good depth because he has that experience. There's not a lot of experience depth at guard or at tackle. So if those 5 or even those 6 can stay pretty healthy, they've got a chance. I think they can be solid. But you get an injury and it all, and a lot of teams, I mean, Pitt's not unique in that regard. I mean, most teams could not really suffer 2 or 3 serious injuries on the offensive line and manage to survive it, it's going to set anybody back. But that's probably my take on the O-line this year's. I think they'll be okay. They just got to stay on the field.
Chris, got a question for you. I'm going to do a little bit of promotion here. When I can, it's usually the playback aspect of it. I watch the podcast on YouTube, but
nice.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You do that live on Wednesday nights, is that correct?
Yeah. We have a daily morning video that I release every morning. It's just about 20 minutes of me talking about whatever happens to be on my mind that day. But then we have our Wednesday night live show, which is always a lot of fun. We get together for an hour and just talk. And what's great about it is like we have the comment screen there so people can post their comments and their questions. It's almost like a talk show a little bit, like a radio talk show. It's just we can't hear their voices. And we also use that live stream format for post-game shows as well, which is probably my favorite thing to do because it's like 8, 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. You get, whatever the night games on the college football or on TV over there. And I'm just sitting here. We'll get the whiskey out and we'll just talk about the game that happened. Because last year we needed the whiskey because it was it was a challenging season, but it's a lot of fun. A lot of people like to tune in for it. The comments and questions and back and forth. And we usually go about an hour. Last year after the Duke game, the season finale, we went for like 3 hours straight, which I was surprised that I could sit here for 3 hours and not have to go to the bathroom. So I was like proud of myself there because the aforementioned whiskey and chasers were sitting heavy, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it, and it's a good time. We have fun.
It's always when you stand up that
I stood up and I was like, gotta go.
Tell people who want to find out more about Pitt and watch where they can find this. Where do they go?
Yeah, the YouTube channel is youtube.com/PantherLaircom. That's where we have all the daily videos, the live streams, press conferences, interviews, and all those kinds of things. And and then everything, our main deal is at PantherLair.com. Of course, that's the mothership. But the YouTube stuff is fun at youtube.com/PantherLaircom.
All right. That's good. I like I said, I watch and it's like I find it entertaining, some of the stuff you guys do, and it's like I'm thinking this needs to be shared a little wider than just the tight-knit group. The offense to me sounds, and the more I read about it, the more I've listened to you explaining how things are going here and the questions that Will's asking. It feels to me like the offense is kind of getting back on track. It feels like it's going in the right direction, and won't use high octane, but it does feel like it's got juice. Okay, so but the one thing, the one area that really concerns me is Pat's forte is defense, and that the defense, at least on paper, doesn't look healthy, wealthy, or wise. Will, I'm gonna let you run with it with some specific questions for Chris.
Yeah, this defense, it's kind of going through a bit of a remake with graduations and portals. I was just doing the math, and I think one person returns that had a sack last season, if I was doing the math correctly. So that tells you how different this defense is going to be this season. But let's start up front, because this is where the biggest makeover is to me. What can you tell us about this defensive line? Because quite frankly, I don't know much about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's everybody. Basically, everybody who started a game last year is gone. The only one returning is Nate Temple, the defensive end, but he suffered an injury in the spring that it was initially called season ending. He's still around the team, so he might play at some point later. But I mean, both the defensive ends who had any starts last year, Deion Hayes and Sam Okunlola, they're both gone to Colorado in the transfer portal. They had 3 defensive tackles who seem like they've been here for about 10 years. They finally graduated and moved on. They had another defensive tackle who had a breakout season last year. He portaled his way to South Carolina. Some of the depth guys, it's ravaged. And so you look at their 2 deep and you've got, one starting defensive end is a transfer, Nate Matlack. One of his backups is a transfer, Chief Borders. Borders from Nebraska, Matlack from Kansas State. You look along the defensive line, you got a potential starter as a transfer from Youngstown State and Anthony Johnson. One of his backups is Francis Brew, a true freshman. One of the backups at defensive end is a true freshman, Sincere Edwards. I mean, you got all these freshmen and transfers sort of littering the two deep, in addition to a bunch of guys who haven't played before. Now, I guess there's two ways to look at it. One, you can be like, there's no production. There's no reason to believe these guys will do anything. Even the transfers didn't really do anything at their previous schools. This is disaster waiting to happen. Or you could be like, well, this is exciting. Let's see what these guys can do. There's a lot of like lottery tickets in here. The freshmen who are in the two deep are both four-star guys, four-star guys coming out of high school. So, all right, that seems encouraging. They were both here in spring. They enrolled in January, so they've got some experience. And the transfers are intriguing guys. Like Nate Matlack was a defensive end at Kansas State in a 3-4 scheme. All right. And he really wanted a chance to play as an end in a 4-3 where he could just be a pass rusher. Well, cool. Let's see how that goes. Chief Borders, Nebraska was playing like a 3-3-5 or something like that. So he was like a 3-4 or something, but he was like a stand-up outside pass rusher. He's never put his hand on the ground. Well, hey, let's put his hand on the ground. Let's see what happens. And like, it might not work. Guy transferring from Youngstown State. Maybe the FCS to FBS, transition works. Maybe it doesn't. They got a defensive end, Nikai Johnson, who moved inside to D tackle. Let's see if it works. I don't know. It's very much up in the air about what's going to happen here. They have good athletes. There are some really guys who were highly touted as recruits coming out of high school, but it's all just sort of a crapshoot. I just don't know what they're going to do. Oh, and they have a new defensive line coach too. So, just top to bottom, complete turnover, total change, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay, so linebacker, it's just amazing how there's been always the D line especially has been so consistent. We've seen so many great ones come through over the years, going back to Aaron Donald. He's one of the best defensive linemen we've seen, in the past 20 years come through, and just now you're like, it's like the scene in Major League. I haven't heard of half of these guys.
yeah. At least, we're sure that they're all alive. We're not going to say this guy here is dead, so we'll be all right.
Cross him off then. Okay, so linebacker Brandon George is kind of the guy. He's the kind of chief as a grad, but the other guys on the outside, they were kind of part-time players, but I don't know. I know they played a little bit, but it doesn't look like they're necessarily guaranteed starting spots either. What can you tell us about these linebackers?
Well, it's funny about the tone of what I'm about to say, because I just went through the defensive line about how none of these guys have played and they're all changing positions and who knows what they're going to do. Like the outside linebackers are sort of the same. They're all sophomore eligible players. There are 3 true sophomores and 1 redshirt sophomore on the two deep. And like I think that might be the most exciting position on the team. It's unproven. It's all potential and what they might be able to do, but like they all look really, really promising. Kyle Lewis, the one outside linebacker, the oldest guy, the redshirt sophomore. The coaches have been excited about him since he got to Pitt. He's just been injured off and on. Now he's been healthy. He's been one of the biggest playmakers in training camp. They defense, when you get a turnover during camp in like a scrimmage or 11 on an 11 drill, they give you this sticker that says takeaway, and they'll put it on your helmet. And so it's this very sort of visceral, very vivid, like tangible, like indicator of who's making plays. Like Kyle Lewis's helmet is like full, almost covered. And there's a couple other guys we'll talk about who have a ton of these takeaway stickers, just making plays in practice. He's going to be really good. The guys on the other side, Braylon Lovelace and Rasheem Biles, both played some last year. Not a ton, but some. Lovelace recovered a fumble and scored a touchdown at Virginia Tech, and Biles blocked 3 punts on special teams. This is the kind of athletes that these guys are. And there's a fourth one, Jordan Bass, who played a little bit, not quite as much. But they're all guys who, I think most of them played safety in high school. So they were sort of bigger safeties. Jordan Bass, the one linebacker I mentioned, if you watch his high school, his senior highlights, the first play on his film is him catching a screen pass and going like 65 yards for a touchdown. This is a defensive prospect. This is the guy who's playing linebacker in college, and they're putting a 65-yard screen pass touchdown on his highlights because that's the kind of athlete he is. And so I think it's going to be exciting to watch these guys. I think all 4 of those guys are going to play a lot. They're going to rotate in. They're going to be in different packages. And I think they're going to make plays. There'll be some growing pains along the way. They'll have some runs they don't fit right. They won't always read their keys right, but they're going to make explosive plays. And I think, last year I think the linebackers were a bit of a letdown. There were high expectations for guys like Bengali Kamara and Solomon Shields, who have both since transferred out of Pitt. I think there were high expectations, but they didn't really live up to it. I think this year's outside linebackers are going to live up to it. I mean, they're young, they're unproven, but they're athletic, they're explosive, and I think they're playmakers.
Secondary is kind of a mixed bag because we know the safeties are good. Donovan Wilson, Javon McIntyre, really good players. Led the top 2 in tackles on the team. Corners, though, not so much. What can you tell us about the secondary?
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. And that was one of the biggest questions. There's a number of spots, particularly in this defense, that have been manned by like the same 3 guys for the past like 4 years, largely due to the super senior COVID year rule. Defensive tackle is one of them. They had 3 guys who were here literally since the recruiting class of 2018, and they finally finished their eligibility last year. At corner, it's kind of the same thing. They had 3 guys who had been around for a long time. They're finally gone. And so this door is open for all these guys who haven't played as much to finally get out there. Rylan Gandy's the top guy. He should be really good. He was their top corner in the spring, top corner in training camp. And he's got a starting job. Rashad Battle is going to start opposite him. He's a guy who's been around for a few years, but has missed a lot of time due to injury. But he's really tall, long corner. I think they're excited about what he can bring. And then, to some extent with the corners, they've recruited so well at that position and developed so well and coached so well at that position over the past 10 years since Narduzzi has been here. When you look at the corners they put in the NFL, there's a bunch of guys who are getting paychecks, a bunch of guys who have done a good job, and they've just year after year, whenever somebody graduates or moves on, they've just transitioned into a new group really well. And so there's sort of this like blind faith and kind of benefit of the doubt for the staff that, like, even though we don't really know if these corners are any good, they probably will be, because these guys have been good at recruiting and developing corners in the past. So I think there's some optimism there. And then the safeties, safety is probably the most talented and deepest position on this team. I mean, you mentioned McMillan and McIntyre. PJ O'Brien is one of the, is if he doesn't start, he'll play a lot at the one safety spot. He's another guy with all the stickers on his helmet, all the takeaway. He might have had the most. Actually, no, he didn't have the most. He had the second most. The guy who had the most is the guy behind him, Bruce Brookins, who's a redshirt freshman and was like the talk of spring camp. He was named the most improved player on defense in spring. He was the talk of training camp. I don't think there's been a single Pitt player hyped more by his coaches and teammates than Cruz Brookins, this redshirt freshman safety. All 4 of those guys are going to play. They're going to rotate. McMillan will play the most, but the other 3 are going to rotate in a lot. It's a strong position. It's a deep position, a talented position, and they'll do well on the back end. They need that push up front, but I think the secondary will be okay.
Let's take a look at special teams. We'll go with kicking, punting, and returners. And you mentioned some of the talent that is on the team that is excelling at special teams already. So it sounds like there's a pretty solid group there. It's the specialists we want to be concerned about.
Yeah, Ben Sauls is a guy who Ben Sauls is the place kicker. 2 years ago, he finished the season making like 15 of his final 16 field goals. He made 5 to beat UCLA in the Sun Bowl. He might have been named the MVP of the Sun Bowl. If he wasn't, he should have been, because again, he made 5 field goals, including the game winner. And so he finished on this like hot streak. He was 15 out of 16. The only one he missed was like a 54-yarder at Virginia that bounced off the upright. So it had plenty of leg. It just was slightly off. So it was great. And then he goes into last year, and I think he was like 11 of 16, which is not a good percentage. But reality is, if you only attempt 16 kicks in a season, you're not getting a whole lot of opportunities. So I think he's looking to be more consistent. He's got a strong enough leg. It was kind of funny. Everybody was excited about the NCAA college football game. He's left-footed. He's a left-footed kicker. They made him right-footed in the game. I mean, it's disrespectful. It's shameful. You got to get the details down, I asked him about it. He's like, yeah, you'd think they do a little research. I'm like, They seem to have done a ton of research on this game. How'd you mess that one up? But so if you play the game and something looks off, that's what it is. But no, I think he'll be good. He should be really consistent this year. And I know that's what he's looking to do in his final year. Caleb Junko's their punter. He was an adventure last season. I think he had a punt in that Sun Bowl 2 years ago that like landed and rolled and ended up being like an 82-yard punt or something like that. It was like some absurd thing. It was like the longest punt in Pitt history, but it rolled like 20 yards. But he was just really inconsistent last year. And there were games where he really hurt the team because of the field position he gave up with shanked punts and short punts. I think it was in his head. I think it was mental. There's no question. He's got the leg. He just was mentally not there. And so that's been a big focus for him this offseason. The coaches are optimistic. We'll see. Probably the biggest thing with the special teams this year, guys, is they have a new special teams coordinator. Jacob Bernowski, he was at Miami of Ohio, where he was considered one of the better young special teams coordinators in the nation. Because we talked about the change from Frank Signetti to Cade Bell as offensive coordinator. Like, it didn't stop there. Like, this is an entirely new offensive coaching staff. I mean, everybody's gone. After he fired Frank Signetti, he fired Andre Powell, the running backs coach, Dave Borbley, the offensive line coach, and Tim Salem, the tight ends coach. And then in like January, February, Taekwon Underwood, the wide receivers coach, left to go to the New England Patriots. So it's 100% turnover on the offensive side of the ball. And that included Andre Powell, who in addition to coaching running backs was the special teams coordinator. Well, so he brought in Jacob Bernowski, who's going to handle the tight ends and the special teams. And everybody's remarked about it's funny. They've talked about how organized he is. And that's always struck me that, like, you know, you interview players, you interview coaches, like, what do you think of this guy? What do you think of? And it's all sort of the same standard. Oh, he's got a lot of great energy. I really like working with him. I connect with him. When they talk about it being organized, like, that's a little less common of a point of praise. And it makes me feel like there's a little bit more sincerity to it. And obviously it stands in comparison. You know, they're clearly making an implicit comparison to what was last year, that they'll be more organized in their schemes and their execution on special teams. And so I think there's a chance for special teams to take a step forward. They have to punt the ball better. And Ben Salas has to be consistent with the place kicking. The returns, put your fast guys back there who can reliably catch the ball. I kind of feel like if you have a fast guy who can catch the ball reliably and you have a good scheme that your kids execute, you'll have good return units. And it's like, oh, he's a great returner. Well, there have been great returners. Devin Hester is a great returner, but I think there have been more great schemes and great execution than like just individuals who just have a knack for running through a pile of 21 other guys. So, but that's just me. I may have no idea about it, but so that's probably the most important addition on special teams this year is bringing in the new coordinator.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to that aspect of the game. Just I'm going to watch very carefully and see how things work out.
See how organized it is.
Well, I can appreciate that because I live with somebody who is well organized. And so I appreciate that. She's an expert at that. Let's talk about the schedule. I'm not. Let's talk about the schedule. Kent State should be a fairly easy start to the season, I would think. And I don't see anything. What is that? I thought the nickname or the team name for Kent State was unusual. It was Golden Flashes or something like that.
Golden Flashes, yeah. I don't know what that is. I don't know why they're the Golden Flashes, but yeah.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
Anyway, it just struck me a little odd. Next game up is Cincinnati, which I think is going to be a bit of a challenge. I don't know where Cincinnati stands this year. I haven't really had an opportunity to kind of dig into them, but they have been progressing slowly but surely into more of a very competitive program. What do you see there?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they beat Pitt last year, but that doesn't make them unique in that regard. And then they went on to have their own 3-9 season. So I think Scott Satterfield, I think, is the coach there. Went from Louisville to there. Never really impressed me all that much, to be honest. As a coach, I didn't really think he was anything special. I guess they brought back. They have a defensive tackle, and I think his last name is Corleone. And so everybody calls him the Don. And he had I think he had a rather serious health scare earlier this calendar year, but it seems like he's going to be able to play. So good for him. Their D tackles last year were really good, and it was a big challenge for Pitt. But I think that maybe the toughest thing here is you're going on the road. That stadium is not big, but if it's packed, it can be pretty loud. And so that's going to be a good first test for this team. Even if Cincinnati might not be very good, you go on the road against another power conference opponent, and you're going to get a challenge.
If I remember correctly, that game was on the CW last season. If we saw football games on the CW last season, nothing made sense.
I've unfortunately there's nothing that's been announced for the CW yet, but Pitt has plenty of games available for TV assignments, so we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm seeing some chatter about games being split off also to Warner Brothers Discovery Channel, which is interesting. It's preliminary, so we'll see. It's WBD and CW are the two places where some ACC games may be headed. I don't know that for a fact, so don't print that. The Backyard Brawl, West Virginia. I always love this game. I don't, it's just that good old home cooking game, I mean, it's just I don't know where West Virginia stands this year either. Their program has been less than spectacular since migrating into some conference that nobody talks about anymore. But anyway, this game should be interesting.
Oh yeah, it will, and it doesn't matter where West Virginia is or where Pitt is. I mean, these two teams always battle, and it's big. It's a big battle. 2 years ago, they had a great game here in Pittsburgh. A pick six that ended up winning the game. Last year, Pitt went down there and just had a miserable performance from Phil Dracovic, the quarterback. Defense played well enough to win. I think they only gave up, what was the score, like 7? Yeah, it was 17-6. That's, if you hold your opponent to 17 points, you should win most games in college football. And that, so that was obviously a big failing on the offense, but this one's going to be awesome. It's a 3:30 game. The only conflict here is the Pittsburgh Pirates are playing that day as well. I think they have a 12 or 1. I think they have a 1 o'clock game. And if you don't know Pittsburgh in the North Shore area, PNC Park is here, Acrisure Stadium's here, and there's parking lots in between. Well, both stadiums use the same parking lots, and so it's going to be, this was more of a concern before the Pirates completely went in the tank, when they were still in competition for the wild card a month ago. Excuse me, or a month and a half ago. It was like, oh God, it's going to be, whatever this date is, September 14th. That place is going to be packed on the Saturday afternoon. Maybe a little less packed, especially if they shut down Paul Skeens, so he's not pitching that day. Maybe you'll get less people, and there won't be as much of an issue with parking. But it's going to be a great game. The atmosphere is going to be awesome. It's going to be 68,000 people there. There's going to be a lot of West Virginia fans, but that kind of makes it fun too, because it's just going to be great. I can't wait.
Youngstown State is next. That also ought to be, I would think, a kind of a tune-up game for Pitt.
Yeah, it should be either a game to reset if you lost one of those first three or two of those first three. And, West Virginia, it's going to be a physical game. So if you come out of that and you got some guys who are a little banged up or might need a little extra rest and recuperation, they have an off week after the Youngstown State game. You could really get guys 2 weeks of rest if you have some key players who are, like I say, beat up, because you play the Backyard Brawl, some guys are going to get beat up. There's going to be some physical plays. So I go back and forth about whether it's better to have that FCS game week 1, or Pitt has done this a couple times in the last few years, playing it week 4, the final week in September. I kind of think it's nice, especially if you can get Kent State, or one year they had UMass in week 1, and then you get that Youngstown State or New Hampshire, whoever, in week 4, right at the end of September. I think it's a good break. And then you get a split between non-conference and ACC games. I think the schedule works out well like that.
Yeah, the schedule this year for the ACC teams overall, I think is very interesting, at least so far that we've seen. After that week 5 off that you mentioned, North Carolina is next up on the schedule. I'm not really sure what to think of North Carolina, but at the same time, I'm really not 100% sure what to think of Pitt either. So this may be we're not sure exactly what's happening, but it's going to be a football game.
Yeah, I wonder what North Carolina's September looks like. I don't know if they play what kind of games they have, but this could be very much a proving kind of game for both teams. If they're both entering their 5th or 6th game of the season, really could have a chance to set the tone for the rest of the year. Pitt has never won at North Carolina since they joined the ACC. Now, conspiracy theorists will have some thoughts about, what gets cooked up there at North Carolina Stadium. I don't know. I couldn't speak to anything, but I don't know what North Carolina's quarterback situation is, right? I mean, you knew the last few years, you knew what you were going to get, but
nobody else
now
does either.
Right. It's so I don't know what to think about that game.
Cal's up next. That could be a challenging game. Cal is got a lot more in the tank than I think people are giving them credit for.
Yeah, I wonder about that too, because I'm in that boat too. That sort of initially when the schedule got announced, kind of looked at their last year and I was like, looks like they stink. But I don't know. It seems like they've got. I mean, I'm sure they've probably got a transfer quarterback, right? Everybody has a transfer quarterback in this conference this year. But I don't know. I don't know. That's going to be another one that after the first like 5 or 6 games, it'll be like, oh, okay, that's who Cal is. Just like Pitt and basically 14 or so of the 17 teams in this league.
One of the things that we can always count on in the ACC is everything that we thought was going to be one way usually flips and is the total opposite by the middle of the season. So that's sort of what I'm anticipating at this point. Week 8 is an off week for them, and then there's an interesting stream of games. Give us your thoughts on Syracuse, SMU, Clemson, Louisville, Boston College. It just sort of progressively gets a little bit more, and then maybe it's off. Maybe.
And then it gets Boston College. Syracuse on a Thursday night. I don't know. I think Pitt. There's a lot of things for Pitt to be bitter about from last season. They went to Yankee Stadium and played Syracuse, and Syracuse ran the Wildcat with like their third string tight end, and they ran it effectively and they ran it successfully. And it was a miserable game. And Christian Veer, who's Pitt's quarterback at that point, committed like 3 awful turnovers, maybe 4 actually, and maybe 2 fumbles and 2 picks. I mean, it was. I have to think that was one of those like last straw games for Pat Narduzzi. I think he really, really, really will want to get one back against Syracuse. I think the players who were on that team last year will really, really, really want to get one back against Syracuse. And so that's going to be an interesting one. Thursday night games at Pitt don't always draw very well. I don't think this one will draw very well no matter what Pitt's doing or how they're doing. They could be 6-0 going into that game, and I still don't think they'll draw very well. But I think it'll mean a lot to the players. Going to SMU for the game after that, I think that looks like that's going to be tough. Regardless of what we saw this past Saturday. I mean, I still think Preston Stone's pretty good. I'm not the only thing I'm taking out of this past Saturday is that Haynes King is still pretty solid. Like he's pretty much who I thought. Like and that I'm still not convinced about DJU, but that goes back 3 years now of not being convinced about him. It's like just because you're on the West Coast you're not going to trick me into thinking you're good. So no, that's not going to work. But yeah. Well, I was like, when I saw that line was like 27, or was it like, no, it was 10.5. It was 10.5 in that game. And I was like, I don't know, man. I didn't think Georgia Tech would win, but I was like, I think 10.5 might be a number that could play here.
Yeah.
Who knew? But anyway, so SMU, I think that'll be a tough game down there. Virginia comes here after that. I don't think Virginia is going to be very good. I don't know what to make of Clemson. I don't know if anybody has any idea what to make of Clemson. You talk about quarterback questions. They've got them. Next to last game of the season, they go to Louisville. There's always this conversation about like which ACC quarterback or which transfer is going to end up being the best. Like, I think Tyler Shugg is like I don't know if he's how much of a dark horse he is. I feel like he's a dark horse that if he can stay healthy, just because I think Jeff Brom is that good. I think Jeff Brom is low key like top 5, top 4, top 3 coach in this conference. I think he's just a stud. And I think if Shugg stays healthy, I think Louisville's going to be a real handful again. And then it's Boston College. And, there were only 3 teams that lost to Pitt last year. There was only 2 of them were in the ACC. Now, granted, one of them was Jeff Brom, who I just talked up, but pay no attention to that. They were still very good. Boston College was one of those teams that lost to Pitt last year. They made Thomas Castellanos look pretty pedestrian, although it was, the next to last game of the season, and I think he was banged up, but this is the final game of the season. So is he going to make it to game 12? at even close to 100% health? I think probably not. So we'll see about that, but I'm not too concerned there. But again, this all is with the complete question mark that is Pitt football. So I don't know.
Yeah. Final thoughts, questions, Will?
I think everything's kind of encapsulated there with what Chris just finished with. I don't know. Because there are so many question marks that we're really not going to know until we get a couple games into the season to really get a real good feel for this team.
Yeah. And I mean, it's Pitt. It's around the ACC. I think that I see that the ACC has more unannounced or undecided quarterback competitions than any other conference, like just all over the league. Yeah, all over the league. People are doing what Pitt is doing. Well, I don't know. It might be this, might be that. And is it Clemson's not releasing a depth chart at all because Georgia didn't or something like that? I mean, like, so it's, and then you have all the transfer quarterbacks and then the general transfer upheaval around the conference. It certainly affects Pitt, who's coming off their worst season in 30 years. But it's all these teams. I mean, there's so many question marks. I don't know which team I feel like I know the most about at this point. I'm really, which I guess makes it fun, right? Because who knows what the heck is going to happen.
And unlike a certain unnamed coach in the ACC, Chris will take your questions on his show on Wednesdays.
Yep.
So, our special guest has been the editor, writer, and podcast host at Panther Lair. It's been a pleasure, Chris, having you on and talking about Pitt football and getting your thoughts and getting a feel for where the team is going and maybe not. So, but thanks for joining us, Chris. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to ACC Nation. Be sure to listen, like and subscribe to our podcast, radio, and YouTube channels by visiting accnation.net. Follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, Mastodon, Threads, Blue Sky and Reddit at ACC Nation.
ACC Nation.